Let's start by getting the obvious out of the way first. West Side Story's plot is based on Romeo and Juliet. This was the first time the top-down panning shot over New York City was used, and it is still used in many movies and TV shows today. The original Broadway production debuted in 1957, and was groundbreaking for using music and dance to tell a story about real issues like gang violence and racism. The finger-snapping was thought up by choreographer and co-director Jerome Robbins. Russ Tamblyn, who played Riff, was in the Army when he saw West Side Story on Broadway, and fell in love with it so much that he bought the album and memorized all Tony's songs so he could play him one day. When Tamblyn was released from the Army, auditions were happening for the film, but he was still on contract with MGM, but they let him audition anyway for Tony's part. But in the end, he was chosen to be Riff. He was a trained gymnast, but you'll notice that he struts more than he dances because he never had any dance training. George Chakiris, who played Bernardo, was playing as Riff in the London stage production when he auditioned for the film. West Side Story was going to be about Catholics and Jews in New York City coming into conflict over the East Passover holidays. As you can imagine, this idea wasn't very catchy, and it was scrapped when composer Leonard Bernstein saw a headline in the LA Times that inspired him to change the story. The prologue was going to take place in the Jets' clubhouse, where they would be reading comics about going to the moon, and then they'd break into song about space travel. But that idea was eventually considered to be too childish and was scrapped. However, most of the music for that song was kept as the prologue's instrumental score. Jerome Robbins auditioned 2,000 dancers in order to find the cream of the crop for the movie. The two actors who played Tony and Maria on Broadway weren't chosen for the film because they looked too old to play a young couple on a large cinema screen. Several songs, including the Jets song, were written for the opener to create an edgy gang vibe for the Jets. The songwriter Stephen Sondheim wrote a book called Finishing the Hat that has the lyrics for all the songs that didn't make it into the film. You can check out the link to it in the descriptions below. The Jets song was chosen in the end, but Sondheim still didn't think it was edgy enough because of their inability to swear. That's why there are a lot of toned-down euphemisms in the dialogue and music.
Well, he saved my ever-loving neck.
Because if they had kept them in as they wanted, then the censors wouldn't have allowed them to sell the album outside of New York. Jerome Robbins didn't want cast members of opposite gangs to interact with each other off-set so that they could stay in character better during shoots. For this reason, George Chakiris and Russ Tamblyn eventually became good friends, but not until after the film was over. During the dance at the gym, the Sharks dance in a circular shape with a central focus which is reflective of Latino culture. The Jets, on the other hand, dance in a linear structure to represent their Polish-European heritage. The dancers rehearsed this number 12 hours a day. Most injuries and illnesses happened while filming this scene because of its competitive nature that motivated the dancers to try to outperform one another. George Chakiris ripped his only 2 pairs of pants for this scene and wore black tights underneath them to avoid any indecent exposure. Robbins intended for Tony and Maria to never touch while dancing in this scene to show the tension that is between them and their gangs. The choreography was intentionally very basic to portray the universal nature of falling in love. America is the only joyous piece in the entire musical, and on concert stages it is often a showstopper because crowds love the number so much. The musical number is only a few minutes long, but it took 2.5 weeks to film in order to perfect the fast-paced delivery of the lyrics and explosive dancing. For the Broadway production, Stephen Sondheim wrote the song for the Sharks' men and women, but Jerome Robbins only wanted women in the scene and insisted he change the lyrics. When it was time to do the film, the scene was staged with men versus women, as Sondheim had always wanted. Composer Leonard Bernstein was on a vacation in Key West when he heard Cuban music on the radio and was inspired by it to create the music for West Side Story. However, he was also inspired by some of his own unproduced work and included it in a few areas of the music as well. For example, America's Main Rhythm
Everywhere crime in America
was an unused song from his operetta Candide. Robbins was meticulously concerned for all the musical numbers except Krupke because of its less artistic appeal as a comedic song. The other production leads kept bugging him to stage it, and he finally gave in and put the whole thing together in only a few hours. Sondheim is embarrassed about his lyrics for I Feel Pretty. It was his first movie, and he wanted to prove to the world that he could do complex inner rhymes.
I feel charming, oh so charming. It's alarming how charming I feel.
He gave Maria so many inner rhymes that he feared she was saying things that were completely out of character. An esteemed colleague of Sondheim came to rehearsal and confirmed his fears when he pointed out that the lyrics felt out of character. Sondheim tried to change the lyrics to tone it down, but the other production leads were pleased with how it was, so the song remained unchanged. Jerome Robbins was fired halfway through the production because of his offensive and authoritarian behavior, and his perfectionist nature slowed down the filming schedule. On his last day on set, he stopped by screenwriter Ernest Lehman's office to say goodbye. Lehman asked Robbins to help him know in detail how the rumble scene would play out. Robbins then went to his office and typed out every detail of the scene, which they followed religiously. The rumble scene was controversial for its time because having 2 people die at the end of Act 1 was very uncommon and went against the standard upbeat happy musicals that were commonplace on Broadway. Cool was the first song Stephen Sondheim and Leonard Bernstein wrote for the film. Initially, Sondheim thought Krupke and Cool should be switched in the story because he liked how it flowed better with the Jets needing to keep cool before the War Council. During a rehearsal for the Broadway show, he shared this idea with Jerome Robbins, and Robbins said that it was too late to change the set design, but if they ever did a movie, they'd try it out. During the movie production, they tried switching the 2 numbers, and Sondheim realized he was wrong and said it was better the way it was. A parking garage was chosen for the setting to reflect how they're confined by their communities with nowhere else to go. Michael Jackson was a huge fan of West Side Story, and there are references to the film in his videos like Beat It and That. Russ Tamblyn, who played Riff, thinks Michael Jackson used the line he shouts to Bernardo in the prologue, "Beat it," as inspiration for Beat It. Barriers such as fences are littered throughout the scenes and are often placed between the actors to create tension, which makes this moment even more powerful because just when Tony and Maria have a wide open space to run to each other, Tony gets shot by Chino. Audiences were captivated by the film so much that people often sat in the theater until the credits ended. Choreographer and Hollywood film director Adam Shankman, who directed 2007's Hairspray, said after he saw the film he didn't move for about 15 minutes because he was awestruck by the whole thing and knew that show business was what he wanted to do for a living. The musical has been adapted in many different countries like Austria, South Africa, Israel, and Japan. West Side Story didn't win any Tony Awards when it debuted, and lost the Best Musical Award to Music Man, and some critics thought it was because the songs weren't catchy enough. However, a few years later, the film won 10 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, making it the highest awarded musical still to this day, and only 1 award shy of tying Ben-Hur, Titanic, and The Lord of the Rings: The Return of the King with 11 awards each. If there's a film you'd like to learn more about, please leave a comment below, and if this is your first time to the channel, make sure to subscribe to learn more about dance-related content.